Chika and Amara Obi were the perfect picture of love when they first got married. They were young, full of hope, and had dreams of starting a family together in the bustling city of Lagos. Chika, a hard-working civil engineer, was known for his strength and determination, while Amara, a vibrant schoolteacher, was the heart of the home. She was warm and nurturing. However, the early years of their marriage weren't as smooth as they expected. They faced one of the most difficult challenges a young couple could face: childlessness. Year after year, they waited for the cry of a baby in their home, but it never came. Amara's heart ached with each passing month, and even though Chika tried to remain strong for both of them, the weight of the situation was heavy on him too. In Nigeria, a society where having children is seen as the ultimate blessing in marriage, the pressure was immense. Amara's mother was relentless. Every phone call ended with, "When will you give us grandchildren? What is the problem?" Amara cried silently at night, feeling as though she was failing as a woman. She watched as other women around her easily became pregnant and raised their children, while she waited empty and uncertain. After 5 long years, Chika and Amara began to seek medical help. They visited hospitals and traditional healers. They prayed in churches in the hope of reversing their situation. Finally, after 7 painful years of waiting, their prayers were answered. Amara was pregnant. The joy that filled their home was indescribable. The news spread quickly, and their friends and family celebrated with them. Amara and Chika were overjoyed. The anticipation was overwhelming, and they vowed to love their child unconditionally no matter what. When the day finally came, it was a double blessing. Amara gave birth to twins, 2 boys, whom they named Chuma and Nonso. The house was filled with laughter, joy, and endless congratulations. Their years of waiting were finally over, and they had been blessed not just with one child, but two. From the very beginning, there was something about Chuma that caught everyone's attention. He was lively, alert, and always seemed to be ahead of Nonso in development. While Nonso was slower to walk and talk, Chuma was already taking his first steps and forming words. Amara, who had waited so long to be a mother, naturally gravitated towards Chuma. She praised his every achievement and often boasted to friends and neighbors about how smart her son was. "This one will be a doctor," she would say with pride. Nonso, on the other hand, was quiet and more reserved. He struggled with his speech and was often left behind during playtime with his brother. Amara unknowingly began to treat him differently. She was patient with Chuma's mistakes, always encouraging him to try harder. But when it came to Nonso, her tone was less forgiving. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Amara would say, shaking her head in frustration when Nonso couldn't solve a puzzle or finish his homework. Chika, at first, didn't notice the growing disparity in how the boys were treated. He loved both his sons equally, or so he thought. But as time went on, even he began to see Chuma as the one with potential and Nonso as the one who was just different. Amara began to invest more time and resources in Chuma. She enrolled him in extra tutoring lessons, bought him the best educational toys, and praised him constantly, while Nonso was left to figure things out on his own. The favoritism was subtle at first, but as the years went by, it became more pronounced. Nonso noticed the difference. She saw how his mother's eyes lit up whenever Chuma did something well, how she was quick to embrace him and shower him with praise. Nonso really received the same affection. His attempt to impress his parents often went unnoticed, and when he did make mistakes, they were met with disappointment rather than encouragement. Slowly, Nonso began to retreat into himself. He stopped trying to compete with Chuma and accepted his role as the lesser child. But deep down, he was terribly hurt. By the time Chuma and Nonso were 10 years old, the gap between them had widened considerably. Chuma excelled in school, consistently coming first in his class, while Nonso struggled to keep up. Amara's pride in Chuma grew with each passing day. She would often say to Chika, "Chuma is going to make us proud, and I know it." Chika would nod in agreement, though he occasionally felt a pang of guilt when he looked at Nonso, who was often quiet and withdrawn. But the guilt he felt was quickly replaced by the excitement of Chuma's accomplishments. Chuma, basking in the constant praise and attention, became increasingly arrogant. He knew he was a favorite and he used it to his advantage. He would tease Nonso, calling him slow or dumb, knowing that their parents would never scold him for it. Nonso grew more and more isolated. He stopped seeking approval from his parents and instead he found solace in solitude. He spent hours alone, reading books and dreaming of a life where he didn't have to compete with his brother for affection. By the time they entered secondary school, the difference in how they were treated had solidified into a family pattern that seemed impossible to break. Chuma excelled in academics and was always at the top of his class, while Nonso struggled academically. It wasn't that he didn't try, he did, but the pressure to live up to Chuma's standard weighed heavily on him. He often found himself lost during lessons, unable to keep up, and no matter how much effort he put in, his grades always seemed average. When Chuma came home with good grades, he was showered with gifts, new clothes, toys, and sometimes even cash. Nonso's report cards, however, barely got a glance. Even when he had passed, there was no celebration, no encouragement. The subtle message was clear. Chuma mattered more. But what Chika and Amara failed to notice was that Nonso was growing in other ways. While Chuma's overconfidence was causing him to slack in his studies, Nonso had begun to develop a quiet resilience. He no longer sought his parents' approval and had found solace in activities that weren't measured by grades. He spent hours learning how to fix electronics, repairing old radios, and building small gadgets from discarded materials. He wasn't book smart, but his hands were gifted with creativity and his mind was filled with innovative ideas. One evening, after yet another day of school, where Chuma was praised for being brilliant and Nonso was largely ignored, Nonso quietly entered his room and looked at his latest project, an old broken fan. He had pieced them apart. He had been working on it for weeks, figuring out how it functioned and attempting to get it to work again. As he tinkered with the parts, he thought about his place in the family. Why was he always the one in the shadows? Why did his parents only seem to care about Chuma's success? Frustration built inside him, but instead of letting it consume him, Nonso poured it into his work. That night, as he connected the last wire in the fan sputtered to life, whirring steadily as a gentle breeze filled the room. Nonso's eyes widened with pride. For the first time, he felt a sense of accomplishment, one that wasn't tied to academics or the approval of others. He had done something on his own, and it was his little victory. From that point on, Nonso's passion for fixing and creating things only grew better. He spent less time worrying about his grades and more time practicing skills. He started helping neighbors fix their electronics for small fees, and soon, word spread in the community about Nonso's ability. Nonso was slowly becoming known as the young technician, a boy who could repair almost anything. Chika and Amara, however, remained blind to this talent. Their attention was still focused on Chuma, who, despite his early academic success, had begun to struggle. In secondary school, the curriculum became tougher, and Chuma's once natural brilliance no longer carried him as easily as it used to. But the praise he had received for so long had inflated his ego, and he refused to admit that he needed help. He started skipping lessons, assuming he could rely on his natural intelligence. While Nonso, though he was not excelling in school, the boy was quietly growing into his own. His business fixing electronics had expanded, and he had started saving the little money he made. Without his parents' involvement, Nonso was building something of his own, a future they couldn't see or understand. By the time Chuma and Nonso reached their final year of secondary school, the consequences of their parents' favoritism were beginning to show in dramatic ways. Chuma, who once hailed as the family genius, was now struggling to keep up with the demands of his studies. He had grown complacent, relying too heavily on the natural intelligence that had always earned him praise. The extra tutoring and lessons his parents had invested in for him were no longer enough to cover the gaps in his learning. Chuma's arrogance, fostered by years of being the chosen one, prevented him from admitting he needed help. Instead, he began skipping classes and relying on friends to cheat his way through exams. Nonso, meanwhile, had become something of a local sensation in their neighborhood. His knack for fixing things like phones, radios, and even generators was in high demand. He was still quiet and still reserved, but his confidence had grown in ways that had nothing to do with school. He had saved enough money to buy his own tools, and he had even started dreaming of opening his own repair shop one day. Though his parents remained largely uninterested in its achievements, Nonso had found a sense of self-worth that couldn't be taken away by grades or parental approval. Despite their differing paths, Chuma and Nonso rarely interacted. The bond that should have existed between the brothers had been weakened over the year by the favoritism that had driven them apart. Chuma resented Nonso's quiet success, even though he wouldn't admit it. But deep down, he knew that Nonso had something he lacked, which is resilience. Amara and Chika, however, remained blissfully unaware of Chuma's struggles. They continued to shower him with praise and attention, preparing to send him abroad for university. They have saved for years to give him the best education possible, certain that he would make them proud, while Nonso's future was largely ignored. Chika occasionally spoke to Nonso about getting into a technical school, but Amara will cut into the conversation, yelling at Nonso, "Leave him alone with the nonsense things he keeps repairing up and down." The conversations were always brief and lacking the same enthusiasm they had for Chuma's prospect. Nonso didn't complain though. He had learned long ago that complaining wouldn't change anything. Instead, he focused on his business, which was growing more successful by the day. In his final exams, despite all the tutoring and resources his parents had given him, Chuma underperformed. His grades were far lower than expected, and it was clear that he hadn't lived up to the potentials that his parents had seen in him, and for the first time in his life, Chuma faced real failure, and instead of confronting it, he lied. He told his parents that his grades were good enough to secure admission into a university abroad, and they believed him without question. Excited, Chika and Amara poured their savings into sending Chuma to the UK, where they hope he would thrive. But the moment Chuma arrived UK, his problems only grew worse. Without the constant support and praise of his parents, he found it difficult to keep up with the rigors of university life. His overconfidence quickly turned into anxiety, and he began skipping classes. He started partying to distract himself, and before long, he was failing. Back in Nigeria, Nonso's business had grown beyond his wildest dream. He was now earning more than some of his classmates who had graduated with top honors. Though he had never excelled in school, Nonso had found his niche in the world, and people respected him for his hard work and talent. And he began thinking seriously about expanding his business, perhaps even opening a second location. While Chuma struggled abroad, Nonso was quietly becoming a success in his own right. Amara and Chika were thrilled each time they spoke with Chuma on the phone, convinced that he was doing well. Chuma, however, was living a lie. He had dropped out of the university months earlier, but he hadn't had the courage to tell his parents. Instead, he used their monthly allowances to fund his lifestyle in the United Kingdom, partying and living lavishly while pretending to be the star student they believed he was. It wasn't until Chika received an unexpected call from a relative in the UK that the truth came out. The relative had run into Chuma and noticed something was off. Chika at first didn't want to believe it, but when he confronted Chuma, the lie finally unraveled. Chuma admitted that he had dropped out of university, that he had failed, and that he hadn't been studying for months. The news hit Chika and Amara like a hammer. Their perfect son, the one they had invested everything in, had failed them. They felt a deep sense of betrayal and regret. How could this have happened? In their devastation, they finally turned their attention to Nonso, though not in the way he had hoped. They were desperate to salvage some sense of pride. They reached out to him, asking if he could help them financially, as their savings had been drained by Chuma's expenses. For the first time in his life, Nonso had the upper hand. He was no longer the ignored lesser child. He was now the one they needed. The confrontation between Nonso and his parents was inevitable. When Amara and Chika finally came to him asking for help, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions for Nonso. He had spent years in the shadows, watching as they favored his brother, pouring all their love and resources into Chuma, and now, here they were, humbled by the failure of their favored son, asking for his assistance. Nonso didn't react with anger or bitterness, though he had every right to. Instead, he listened quietly as his parents explained their situation. Chuma had failed, and they were at a loss. Their savings were gone, their hopes for the future dashed, and they were turning to Nonso as their last resort. Nonso, who had built his success on his own, without their help or encouragement, could have easily turned them away. But he didn't. He had grown into a man who valued hard work, humility, and compassion. And despite everything, they were still his parents. "I will help you," Nonso said quietly after a long silence. "But things must change. You cannot continue to treat me as though I am invincible. I am not asking for praise, but I am asking for respect. I have worked hard to get where I am, and I deserve to be treated as an equal in this family. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she realized the weight of what Nonso was saying. She had spent years pouring all her love and energy into Chuma while neglecting Nonso. And now she has saw the consequences of her actions. Chika too was filled with regret. They had misjudged their sons. One had been spoiled by their favoritism, and the other one had been shaped into a strong, independent man despite their neglect. They both apologized to Nonso, not just with words, but with action. They began to make a conscious effort to include him in family decisions, to acknowledge his success, and to support his dream in the way they should have from the beginning. Chuma, facing his own failures, eventually returned home. Humbled by his experiences abroad, he realized the damage his arrogance had caused, not just to himself, but to his relationship with his family. He sought to rebuild the bond with Nonso. The road to healing was long, but the family slowly began to mend. Chika and Amara learned the hard way that love must be given equally and unconditionally, and that success is not measured solely by academics or wealth, but by character, resilience, and integrity. Nonso, once the forgotten child, became the pride of the family, not because of his financial success, but because of the strength he had shown in the face of adversity. He was the one who had been underestimated, ignored, and dismissed, but in the end, he became the true glory of the Obi family. And Chuma, though once the favored son, learned that life is not about being the smartest or the most praised, but it's about hard work, humility, and learning from failure. The brothers who had grown apart over the years found their way back to each other, united by the lessons they had learned. In the end, the Obi family learned that love must be shared equally and that every child has the potential to shine if given the chance. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please like, share, comment the lessons you have learned, and do not forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Turn on the post notification bell for updates on our new stories. Stay tuned for more exciting stories from the stables of OT Folktales and Stories. We love you all. Bye-bye.